Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at Blade Runner and representation of ethnicity. An interesting point to start with this topic is to look at Richard Dyer and what he says about representation of ethnicity in film, in particular whiteness. And he states that whiteness is invisible because it simply represents humanness itself. Within this context, non-whiteness can be used to contextualize the abnormal or frame difference of characters. So what Dyer is saying is that in Western films, in Hollywood cinema in particular, white people are not really considered an ethnic group and their ethnicity is not really addressed or talked about. Therefore, any other characters of non-white ethnic or racial origin are used to frame their difference and seen as other. It'd be a good idea to start this analysis by contextualizing Los Angeles in 1982, the year the film was produced. In 1982, when Blade Runner was released, Los Angeles, the city in which the film is set, was a very ethnically diverse city. LA 2019 does not reflect this diversity. In fact, there are no named black characters at all. There are only 18 named characters in the film, and 2 of those are non-white. The street levels are full of multicultural citizens, and in fact, Deckard is a minority figure on the street level. However, none of the non-white characters are developed. They are included to either serve or help the white protagonists, or, if we go back to what Richard Dyer said, give the city a multicultural or quote exotic feel. However, this is only on a surface level. So if we come back to Dyer, we can ask the question, in what ways does Blade Runner position white characters as the norm within this post-apocalyptic society? With all institutions of power, those like technology, like the Tyrell Corporation, the police who seem to work for Tyrell, are controlled by white characters. In fact, the power base in LA 2019's top levels are exclusively white. The white leaders own and control the lives of the replicants. White leaders impose their ideological worldview upon the citizens of the world through their control of technology and institutions. Part of their ideology is that it is morally okay, it's even an economic imperative to own another human being. They view replicants as subhuman in many ways. The police shoot first, ask questions later when it comes to, quote, hunting replicants. So Blade Runner's white powerful elites reflect the white hegemony that we see in our societies. They reinforce and impose as a white supremacist ideology that positions white people at the top of a racial hierarchy, with all other races being subservient and classified as subhuman. So whiteness, white supremacy and technology and powerful institutions are all wrapped up in this form of techno-fascism we've seen in Blade Runner. Now, techno-fascism is a hypothetical form of government in which engineers, scientists and other technical experts are in control of the decision-making processes, where political rights are only gained by technical expertise. In modern parlance, he is a tech lord, a wealthy technologist who sees himself above the legal and moral restrictions that apply to all other citizens. And we see those type of attitudes reflected in people like Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg. Now, as most of these positions are filled by white men in both the real world and in Scott's Blade Runner, the future societies that they create and they perpetuate through their control of technology and institutional power will inevitably lead to racism, exploitation and the marginalization of women, people of colour and LGBTQ plus members. We see the effects of this ideology and this approach to technology and human life reflected in the film. Now, Scott draws attention to this in the film through his use of the replicants. Now, all the replicants are white. Now, you have to remember that this is a world where human beings are created in a lab, so there is no real reason why they would all have a single ethnicity other than an ideological reason. The replicants are stronger, faster, more powerful and more intelligent than our biological humans in the film. And the mise-en-scène of Roy in particular evokes images of Nazi Party's definition of the Aryan race. If you look at the image on screen, and if we look at the design of Roy, it's clear that he is designed to evoke links to like Nazism and their vision of the Aryan race. So in many ways, the replicants are a superior race created by white technological industrialists to represent the potential of man. And because all replicants are white, this symbolises that the leaders of this world see the future of technology and our growth as a society as an almost exclusively white future. And that's reinforced later in the film because all of the non-white characters are in the service of the white techno-industrialists, in particular Tyrell, and this further reinforces the position of white people or white men at the top of the racial hierarchy. When discussing the inspiration for his replicant characters, Philip K. Dick cited a diary of a guard from a concentration camp during World War II. And in the diary, the guard complains about the noise of children who are being tortured, keeping him up at night. What Dick said about this is that to think like that and to respond to human suffering like that means you are a replicant. It means you may have the physical appearance and the biological makeup of a human, but you are not human. You are a replicant. You are a replication of a human. So another way to look at the replicant is through the lens of American slavery, and this is something that is quite overtly coded into the film. Our first indication that the replicants are analogous for the American slave trade and the victims of the slave trade is the term skin jobs. Now, skin jobs is the phrase that most people, if not all people within the world of Blade Runner, use to refer to the replicants. And the replicants are referred to as skin jobs by the police, which is a coded racial term, as they are defined and identified negatively by references to their skin. The replicants can be seen as analogous for American slaves in many other ways as well. They are an enslaved workforce. They are bred and created by white owners to be exploited and controlled, and the breeding of slaves is something that we saw during American slavery in particular. In particular, when the North Atlantic slave trade was outlawed, a lot of white slave owners started breeding programs to basically maintain a workforce. The replicants are identified via a pejorative term for skin, aka the skin job. Now, the replicants themselves are actually banned from entering Earth. They are sent off-world to work in colonies to do the jobs that the humans don't want to do. And this is analogous to sending enslaved people to like the West Indies and Caribbean countries and the southern states in America to farm cotton and sugar, etc. The workforce is disposable. And as I've already said, the replicants are not even allowed on Earth, which is a very white environment in the film. Now, this idea of replicants being analogous and a metaphor for the American slave trade is made explicitly clear by the characters themselves in the film. And the replicants are very aware of their slave status. So we have Leon, when he captures Deckard, saying it's painful to live in fear, isn't it? But that's built upon another point in the film where Roy Batty develops the same sentiment. He says it's quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. And later in the film, I think Rachel makes the most explicit statements about this. She identifies herself as a replicant and says, I am not in the business, I am the business. So the replicants are human for all intents and purposes, but society will not see them this way. They remain subhuman in the eyes of the white hegemonic view that dominates Blade Runner's world. Now, this idea of the term skin job being a coded pejorative term for black people in particular is referenced in the original release of the film. So although not present in later releases, the director's cut and the final cut, in the original cut of the film, there was a narration track. So at the start of the film, when Deckard is picked up and taken to Bryant's office, Bryant is trying to convince Deckard to come out of retirement and hunt down the replicants. And Bryant says, you wouldn't have come if I just asked you. Come on, don't be an arsehole, Deckard. I've got 4 skin jobs walking the street. To which Deckard in his narration says, skin jobs. That's what Brian calls replicants. In history books, he is the kind of cop who used to call black men N-words. So we have quite an explicit reference in the screenplay itself that shows us that the term skin job was always intended as a coded term for the N-word and a pejorative term for non-white characters. Now, this idea is developed throughout the film, and how the police deal with the replicants can be seen as a way to reflect attitudes of Los Angeles police force when dealing with African American suspects as citizens. During the final battle between Roy and Deckard, Deckard fires on Roy even though he's unarmed, and Batty himself says,
"Not very sporting to fire on an unarmed opponent. I thought you were supposed to be good. Aren't you the good man?"
General idea is that the police shoot first, ask questions later. Now, Blade Runner is a film that adopts a cyberpunk aesthetic, and part of the cyberpunk aesthetic is to present a hyper-capitalistic, globalized, dystopian environment. And one of the ways that filmmakers and comic book artists and authors do this is through the iconography of, quote, Asian culture, in particular Japanese, Chinese, and Hong Kong culture on screen. So Blade Runner was made during a period of increased Chinese immigration into the United States. Between 1970 and 1990, the number of American residents of Chinese origin in particular doubled. Now, these symbols of Asian culture dominate the mise-en-scène of the cityscape. However, Asian people themselves are mostly absent or reduced to extra non-speaking roles. References to Asian culture, specifically Japanese and Chinese culture, are everywhere, but they are only surface level. The adoption of Asian culture is superficial and appropriated. The Asian characters we see on the street level, the Asian symbols and languages in the mise-en-scène, they are used to show how exotic and different the future is going to be. And Asian people and culture generally in this film are used as a symbol of difference or for background scenery. And coming back to a point I made at the start of the video, and that idea of Asian people and Asian culture being used as a symbol of difference is shown on screen, and it's shown by the mise-en-scène and aesthetic of the film. The mise-en-scène of the Asian characters is very stereotypical and reductive. We have the geisha figure on the billboard. We have characters riding bikes and walking around in rice hats. Our characters are serving noodles and working in restaurants. So Asian characters seen in rice hats and black jumpsuits running across the city on errands, these are not meaningful representations. All of the characters are basically in service to the white rulers and authority figures. And they are bullied by white characters and all conform to pre-existing stereotypes. Think of Chu in particular. When Batty goes to see him, he is pushed around, he is bullied, and he is physically beaten by the white characters as they extract information from him. And once they've got that information, Chu is never seen again. This idea of Asian characters being subservient and in the service of the white rulers is reflected in Hannibal Chu and a second character called the Cambodian Lady. So Chu works for Tyrell. He works for all the primary white characters but receives no benefit, and he's bullied by those characters. Then we have a second Asian character who's identified not by a name in the script but by a title, and she's referred to as the Cambodian Lady, and she is the character who identifies the snake scale for Decade. And if we look at Hee-Jung Serenity Joo and their essay Oriental Style and Asian Chic, the Politics of Racial Visibility in Film and Fashion, they describe the characters in Blade Runner in the following way. They are invisible Asian labourers who structure the film's narrative, literally serving and working for the film's primary white characters. So ultimately, the representation of Asian characters in Asian culture is very reductive and is used to represent otherness and to give the future globalised world a quote exotic feel. So as we can see from this extract from an essay from E. Jump Cut, which you can find using the link below, which you'll find in the description, it says all non-white characters are, quote, reduced to odd curiosities, non-white characters who exist to speak and to look foreign. For example, Chu is described as, quote, an ancient Chinese in the 1981 script. As Locke points out, quote, all Asian characters with speaking parts are old and decrepit in contrast to the replicant's youth and vigour. Asian characters seem to exist only to underscore the dynamic whiteness of the main characters. And if we move on to Gaff, who is our Hispanic character. Gaff is the only named character from a Hispanic background, and it was originally described as, quote, a short Japanese guy in the original screenplay, but the character's ethnicity was changed when Edward James Olmos was cast in the role. Now this is really interesting because that suggests to us that the ethnicity of the character, him being Japanese, was not relevant to the character itself or his development or his growth or understanding of the character. He was simply a symbol of otherness. He could not be a white American character because he had to be juxtaposed with Deckard. And so what this is called basically is racial substitution. So the ethnicity of the character does not matter. The only thing that matters is that they are non-white, as this reflects their otherness. Non-white characters like Gaff are really interesting, and they speak in a language called City Speak, which is a combination of several non-English languages. Edward James Olmos himself is the creator of City Speak. He describes it as a mix of Spanish, Hungarian, Japanese, partly English. Now, City Speak itself, again, builds into this idea of otherness and exoticness within this futuristic dystopian world, and it serves the following functions. It adds to the exoticism of the world, but also reflects how non-white characters and street-level characters have been ghettoized. Their language deviates from the norm used by white characters, which is further evidence of their othering. So if we consider Tyrell, Deckard, the police force, the white characters who own and maintain power in the city, they all speak in what would be called the elaborated code of language. So it's the Queen's English. They speak very formally, using correct grammar, punctuation, whereas the street-level characters speak in city speak. Gaff's ethnicity is never defined in the film and is actually quite difficult to pin down. So in real life, Los Angeles has a large Latino and Hispanic population, and Gaff is the only, quote, Latino-like character in the film. So he's clearly mixed race. He is coded as Latino due to some elements of his mise-en-scène and the actor playing him. By the very virtue that Edward James Olmos is in this role, that adds an ethnicity to the character. But his role in the film, like that of the Asian characters, primarily is to just signify otherness and add to the exotic nature of LA, and ultimately be in service to or around Deckard. Okay, so that is our breakdown of ethnicity in Blade Runner. Now, there are many, many more things to say about ethnicity in Blade Runner and many, many other approaches we can take. There are obviously many, many more things to say about ethnicity in Blade Runner, but we can't cover all of those in this video. So if anyone has any comments, leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. Check out my website, which is linked below, and please like and subscribe. Thanks.